Capture the Moment with Joe Denyer in this episode of the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. Great photography is a powerful marketing tool. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and when done well, professional photography has the ability to transform your website and digital marketing. In this episode, I'm joined by our resident photographer, Joe Denyer. Joe is responsible for capturing incredible images and moments for our clients. I sat down with Joe to ask him everything he wanted to know about professional photography, but were too scared to ask. For example, with fantastic cameras available at affordable prices, what's the difference between asking someone like Joe to take your photos compared with your nephew and his Nikon? If you're the sort of financial planner who is still rocking a headshot from a decade ago, then this episode is definitely for you. So here's Joe Denyer in Season 2, Episode 4 of the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. Welcome back to the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. Today I'm delighted to welcome Joe Denyer. Joe is our resident photographer here at Bamford Media, so we work very closely together. He works with lots of our clients, and I wanted to bring Joe onto the podcast today really to talk about the importance of photography from a marketing perspective. So how it's used, maybe dispel a few of the common misconceptions around photography. So Joe, welcome to the show. Could you maybe start by telling us a bit about you and a bit about your background, how you became a photographer, and about your life story a little bit?
Hello, for a start. I started off I was really keen into photography very early on. My dad worked on the railways, and he was showing me railway books with fantastic photography from 1983, so I was about 2. And I would, it just continued. I'd be looking at these books and immersing myself in them. At the time, obviously not realising it, but now looking back on it, I would pretend that I was in a shoot myself and how I would be able to take on that atmosphere and become part of that life. Usually it was steam engine photography, so from then it was always about, seeing life in black and white and it being from a bygone era. As life went on, obviously photography, I was seeing different types of photography landscape, and it wasn't just books. I was obviously getting older, but I was still living life almost through a lens. So everything I would see, I would almost be working through manual exposures in my head, even sort of 9, 10, 11. And I guess it just progressed through as I grew up. As I say, I was just exposed to different natural things in life, but I would always have a camera, usually just a disposable camera. But my Grandad Brinicum, he was a keen photographer, just amateur, and he had some nice kit which I would get to play with. But I've only recently been told about that. My mum recently said, "Oh yeah, Grandad had like a Rolleiflex, slide medium format camera, and he used to play with that." And I was like, "Well, I don't remember doing that."
And you don't even get to play with cameras like that today?
No, of course you don't. No, not at all. No. That was amazing. It's a shame, I like to think that she said that it was sold on, and now it's worth about £3,000. I would like to think that had I been given that, as a handy-down, that I would still be able to use it today for special shoots.
And then later in life you ended up in Manchester, and I think Manchester was quite pivotal for you around your career. And
well, before that, I was at college, Brooklands College in Weybridge. I was sort of 17, and there was myself and another boy in class, and we weren't considered to be the ones that they thought really would have any future in a creative industry. So when work experience opportunity came up, he went to Shepperton Studios to do videography and work. He worked on the film set of GoldenEye, I think it was at the time, which was amazing. And I thought, right, I'm not going to target someone local. I'm going to target someone massive. So I went to Allsport, which were formerly Getty Images. I was sweeping their floor, developing their films, talking to sports photographers like these really, world famous sports photographers. And then I straight away realised almost from that point on, it's almost like you always have to persevere with something. And what's wrong with aiming really high? There shouldn't be any limit to what you can achieve if you put your mind to it. And it was almost like those teachers saying to me that I was never going to make anything of myself were some sort of ignition to make me believe actually the opposite. I can be better than that. So
yeah, it often takes that, doesn't it? It takes somebody to not believe in you for you to go off and chase your dream.
It's like a trigger. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody has to kind of knock you down a little bit. It's a bit like when you're younger and you've done something wrong, or you start getting a bit lazy around the house, and then your dad or your mum bollocks you, and then you sort of like, start realising, actually, I'm going to pick my shoes up when I get in the house, I'm going to put them away, or I'm going to hang my coat up when I get in the door. And so, you mentioned Manchester. I fell in love, holiday romance. I was at All Sport for 4 years, and then unfortunately, fell in love. I think it had just got to the time where digital was coming along. My job as a junior darkroom technician, or into a darkroom technician at the time, there was no real need for a darkroom anymore. Anybody processing film, it just wasn't there. So the opportunities were getting smaller and smaller to go into digital, and I certainly wasn't going to be processing film. I might have been a caption writer on images, and then I would have maybe done a little bit of shooting, but I didn't think the opportunity was there. And because I was half thinking about my emotions and my love for this person at the time, and I'd always had a thought that I might live in Manchester at some point in my life, as my dad had been taking me to the football ever since the early 90s or the late 80s even. So I moved to Manchester and worked in fashion and retail, and did quite a bit of account management with different companies. So therefore I was always good with people. And I think that's really helped me later on in my photography career, being able to speak to pretty much anybody, making people feel at ease and comfortable, ready for them being on camera, as a lot of people don't like that.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, because I think for a lot of people, if they get an email round for their company and says, okay, we've got a photographer coming in next week to do team photos and profiles, that email is just a sense of dread.
Yeah,
because they don't want to be in front of a camera.
Of course.
So how do you put people at ease when you go into an office, you go into a business, it's time for the photo shoot, they stand up against that lovely backdrop with your lights on and a camera gear in their face. How do you put them at ease?
Well, the first thing, get them talking about themselves, get them talking about comfortable things in their life, whether it be their children or their pets or, their hobbies. And then you immediately build up that rapport with them, so then they gain a little bit of your trust. The whole time that I'm doing that, talking with them, I'm holding the camera quite closely, so it's almost a part of our conversation. So they're not suddenly daunted by the fact that, right, now I'm going to pick up the camera, and then they have to click back into defensive mode. I think that's definitely one of the key points for me. And then as I start taking the pictures, I might talk them through a position to stand in just to start off. I usually put an X on the floor with insulation tape, so they kind of, so they know exactly where they might be standing. And then, I might carry on talking to them, keep them talking, ask them an opening question so they can be talking, and then I'll start taking pictures. So even if I'm not going to use any of those pictures, I will use them, one, for my lighting so I can get my settings absolutely perfect, and two, because again it's getting them talking. And then you'll find that if you continue that, you might then say something funny to them. Say like I don't have anything in common with them at all, which is very rare. There's always something. We've both got heads on our shoulders for a start, so we've got that in common. Then I will maybe throw in a really bad dad joke. Knock knock, who's there? Europe who? And I'll be thanks, and then there'll be some sort of a smile, even if it's a really I can't believe that person's just said that to me. That is shocking. And then that's already one picture there, and it can just grow from that, really.
And for you as well, I mean, you've photographed a big range of subjects. So for everyone from, as I say, members of teams in businesses through to celebrities and musicians. So how do you manage that sort of nervousness when you're with a big name and you're responsible for capturing those very special moments?
I think ultimately it doesn't matter whether they're a great big celebrity and they're been all over the news, all over the world, or you've seen them on TV growing up, or whoever they are. They're only people at the end of the day, and it's only what the press or that world makes them. They might be a superstar in their own right for being a musician or an athlete or whoever, but ultimately they're only a person. And so you can both talk to each other. Generally speaking, they're going to want to they want to have some photos done because it's good promotion for them. They're almost experienced enough to not be rude. And you know what, even if they are, who cares? Like sometimes we all have bad days, and we all are like under pressure with certain things, whatever it is. So if you don't have that banter with them straight away, or they're not necessarily going to give you a great big high five or a hug or a kiss or whatever, then it just doesn't matter. You just have a little initial chat with them, and yes, I don't necessarily go up to Nile Rodgers and on his tour bus and say the Europe knock joke, but I certainly find something to talk about. And ultimately, it's the same thing. Get them talking, because then they feel like ultimately they're the most important person in the room. I'm just there to try and capture a little tiny moment within that 30-second window that I might have with them, or 20 seconds, depending on how big a sort of celebrity status they have. I think I had about 28 seconds with Nile Rodgers, and I think I shot about 36 pictures in that time, but enough.
Full trigger, fully automatic.
Yeah, it wasn't. Well, also you can't do that, because then there's straight away, well, you're paparazzi. What the hell are you doing in my space? This is. I mean, for him, for example, that was on his tour bus, in his bedroom on the tour bus, shared by the group Chic, and there's about 10 members in their band. So, for him to have, they're all in there like birthing pods, and he's got his like ensuite at the back of the bus, but you can't go in there like flash firing. You still have to have that little bit of chat. Even if you've got 28 seconds, you spend 20 seconds talking to them and 8 seconds taking pictures. You've got to make sure that in that 8 seconds you've got one or two that are going to be worthy of something.
Thinking about the importance of photography from a marketing perspective.
Yes.
All the marketing we do, every business does, is very visual. All of the websites and the digital marketing, the social media platforms are very visual places. You and I look at websites, we look at social media platforms, and we critique them on a regular basis. So what are some of the things that we see that we look at and think, oh my goodness, what went wrong there? I mean, yesterday you and I were looking at a few websites, and we were pulling them to pieces in terms of their photography.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's key points that we discuss while we were looking at websites: portraits, environment, movement, brand, emotion, customers, team. Portraits, for example, there could be 8 people, there could be 8 members in that team who work at that site. 5 of them will have pictures. They won't all necessarily have the same backdrop behind them. The lighting is usually a bit of a mismatch. The focus, for some reason, which I can't work out how somebody can't focus a portrait who's stood right in front of you, even if it's on a mobile phone, you still normally would put your finger on the screen, and you could get a very basic image. So there'd be that mismatch, and then the other, 5? The other, 4 would just, or 3 would just be missing completely. It would have a name underneath it, and there'd be no face. It's like, oh well, we haven't got such and such's face yet, because where's that person? Well, they're living on the moon at the moment, so we're waiting for them to get back. Environment, there'll be absolutely no environment, so then you immediately think, well, it's just somebody working in their shed at home. They haven't got an office space, or they may have looked on some sort of a library, and they'd do the opposite, and they could have an office that could be in the middle of a rainforest or something. Again, it's okay, but it's not really relevant. It's not realistic to their brand. Movement again. So there's not a coming together. There's no flow through the workspace. So you can't see any of that energy that is there. Brand, so they haven't got anything with their logo on. There's no strap lines. There's nothing that has any visual impact within their creative space. Emotion, expressions, so that's just natural. Again, it's almost like energy again. What's going on for the people? Do they love where they're working? There's just none of that. So customers' interaction, so obviously they have a brand, and where's their market? Who is their customer? And if you can't see that, then are you left to think about that? Or then maybe they haven't got a customer. Then, but how small are they? They say that they're successful and they're big and this and that, but I can't see any of that.
It's something we encourage the financial planners we work with to really think about carefully, which is not making themselves the hero of the story, not making it all about them, but making the customer the hero.
Absolutely.
Because really the financial planner and the business owner is there to guide the customer, the client through the journey and to make sure they get safely to their destination. And that does come through in photos. If you look at a website, you look at social media and it's all me, then even if we're not consciously thinking about, well, where's the customer? Subconsciously, unconsciously, we're thinking, well, where are they? They're missing from that picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because then it becomes more about the person who's just had their beautiful highlights done at the weekend, or they've got their beautiful facial hair, but you almost get stuck on that, and you think, well, where is the customer? The customer is what drives the business, and if it keeps, if they keep coming back, then ultimately they are going to put more trust in that brand.
You mentioned a moment ago about the ability to take a fairly good photograph with an iPhone, for example, and the quality now of the cameras we see in iPhones and Samsungs, even consumer cameras you can buy for a few £100s, they are better sensors, better quality than cameras that were professional cameras 10, 20 years ago. So tell me about why it matters to use a professional photographer. What does a professional photographer like you bring to the party compared to someone who's got a nephew with a £500 Nikon or a £500 Canon camera they've bought and are maybe a bit keen on photography? What's the difference?
For me personally, I can only speak from my heart. Is the main one is experience, which ultimately I think overcomes everything. You can somebody can have a £500 camera, yeah, but are they using automatic settings? Are they using manual settings? For me, everything's always been manual. The lighting is then consistent. Even if you have it automatic, it won't necessarily capture the lighting perfectly. If you think how many times are you taking a picture, say on your phone, for example, do you ever consider the fact that you're indoors and the lighting is perfect already? You've got like lovely sunshine coming in, but it's not oversaturating the shot, so it's not overexposing the image. You take the picture. Oh, what was that? Your flash is turned on your phone. It's on auto. Why have you got that flash? Now you've suddenly given that person yellow, like a yellow tint to their skin tone because you've used that yellow flash. And even with a £500 camera, if you have a pop-up flash and it's on auto, for example, there's exactly the same thing will happen again. It'll think that it needs to have the flash on when it doesn't. So, I mean, for me personally, I would see straight away that, say I wasn't using any lighting, my location studio lighting that I take to every shoot, say I wasn't using any of that at all, I consider what my ISO sensitivity is, what my aperture is like my main one. Obviously shutter speed is key because if it's too slow, then you might have some movement and therefore you could be out of focus. But aperture, ultimately controls the levels, the light levels. So immediately say you've just got that white light coming in with the natural sunlight coming in. Because I'm on manual settings and my white balancing is corrected to the setting, the skin tones are going to be absolutely perfect. I think that makes a great big difference. And when you're looking at a website and you can see it's been done professionally, a photographer will certainly put a big tick next to that sort of thing, whereas an amateur or like you say, somebody who's just got an expensive kit but doesn't really necessarily know how to use it in the right situation, I think it's quite an obvious thing to be able to see that it's not been done professionally. And everybody's got to start somewhere. Everyone has to learn. But I think that, when you're doing it for a website, it needs to be perfect. And there's plenty of opportunity for practicing, like behind sort of closed doors, if you like. And that's how that's certainly one of the reasons.
It's a case of all the gear and no idea in some cases, isn't it?
Yeah.
You and I had a funny experience before Christmas where we were at a shoot together, and I was holding your camera for a bit, took a few photos, and said to you, make sure you credit me if you use those photos.
Yeah.
How will you be able to tell which ones I took? And you immediately broke up laughing because it was quite clear which ones I'd taken compared to which ones you'd been taking.
Yeah.
Mine weren't straight.
Your horizon was pissed at the time, I remember. It looked like we were on a ship, a sinking ship.
And that was with a £3,000 setup.
They were all my settings, but straight away I could see that you had got your horizon wonky. So, and I know that, and you had actually done that same thing when we did our jigsaw run, our charity run. You fired off about 3 shots, and straight away you did it wonky, but. And that can work for some pictures, but I could straight away realise that it wasn't correct for that.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional or arty. It was just off balance. But yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think there is a huge difference between when I see the quality of what you take versus what I can take, and I'd class myself as an enthusiastic photographer. I've had 15, 20 years worth of practice doing it. I love doing it, but there's just a huge gulf between what I can achieve and what you can achieve, even with the same kit, same settings, which is quite telling. Now, one of the issues we see within financial services, particularly within the trade press, is out-of-date photos, and we see this on websites too and on social media. But I can think of numerous examples of financial planners, financial advisors I know who are in the press regularly, but the photo that's printed with their column or their article, their comments, is a decade or longer out of date. And I'm guilty of doing this sometimes as well. But how often should we get our photographs updated?
I would say probably every 1 to 2 years. I would probably think that it would be best. For portraits, for example, you do change slightly over time. I don't actually know the complete answer to that question, because it could be a personal thing, couldn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I think 1 to 2 years is a pretty good interval to get it done. Anything older than that, fashion changes. The style of what we're wearing changes. Of course, it's very, again, maybe without even thinking about it directly, I think we see photographs that are outdated and a bit old, and we immediately know in our brains that actually that isn't quite authentic. It's not quite up to date with the person that's going on. So it sounds like a good interval.
And also, say if I just think about that, for example, with my own website, I would want to update my website. I would probably do it for photography. I'd probably do it my own personal stuff, I'd probably do it every 6 to 8 months, because I'm shooting that much stuff and I feel like I'm getting better and better and better. So I guess 1 to 2 years for portraits, for example, you'd want to do, as you say, it could be your style could change slightly. You may have grown a beard, and that could be your new you. And so why would you not want to have that as that's your current you, isn't it, at the end of the day? So
I know one of the things that prevents people from engaging with a professional photographer like you is the fear that it's going to be prohibitively expensive. So give us some ballparks. I'm not sort of looking for precise prices, but some ballpark figures. What can you expect to spend, and most importantly, can you expect to get once you spend that sort of money with a photographer?
I think most people would think that it would be thousands of pounds, or at least £1,000. For me, it's more likely, roughly 250 to 500, I would say. With that, you would get probably 40 to 60 images for for, say, a 2 to 3 hour shoot. And you know what? Even if I did a 1 hour shoot, I would probably still shoot 40 images. It's just that it all depends on the type of the shoot that it was. But for this market, 40 to 60 images, you've got them in both high resolution, which you would use for, which are 300 DPI. I do all of that. Again, that's what you get with the professional photography. You get it all edited correctly. And that would be used for anything printed. So magazines, leaflets, anything like that. And then you also get it in low resolution, which is 72 DPI. That can be used for any screen, anything that's for your social media, website, etc. As I say, and you also get the experience of somebody who, myself, have been editing since probably 1998. I think I've been using or 1997 I've been using Photoshop for. So you just learn not to go over the top with Photoshop. Unless you're rebuilding a bride's face for a wedding, which I haven't had to do for years, fortunately. You shouldn't. It should be as natural as possible. And I think again with the lighting, say I am using my lighting. I do for a lot of my portraits, just so you get that consistency. You shouldn't have to do that much Photoshop work because of the lighting is key. If the lighting's really high-end lighting, then the skin tones are going to be perfect, the focus is going to be perfect, obviously the expression you would hope is going to be perfect, because that person is going to have a natural a good natural smile, or they're going to look comfortable on camera, they're going to look professional, and they're going to look proud of what they're all about.
Yeah, and also approachable and authentic and friendly and the rest of it, which is so key, particularly when we're thinking about approaching financial planners. But it sounds like what you get within that package is sufficient, not just to update the website, but also almost to have a folder of assets that you can then use as the situation arises.
Of course, you can drip feed that into your market as and when you need it over the next year, over the next 2 years. Ultimately, you just drip feed it in.
And we encourage financial planners to put themselves out there to pursue PR opportunities, so to comment in the press, because it's a great way of building your profile. And very often the first thing a journalist will ask for after you've given them comments is a high resolution headshot, because they need that to accompany the piece and to make it so relevant. Now, you don't just shoot financial planners, as tempting as that would be and as exciting as that would be. I know you do an awful lot of different work in different sectors. So recently, and this was part of a shoot with a financial planner, we had you out in Ireland, in County Sligo, doing a documentary shoot for a magazine feature for a financial planning firm. You've just spent some time with the Flying Scotsman. Tell us about the Flying Scotsman, because that was an interesting one.
So going back to my dad, having worked on, he retired in 2018. He'd worked for 50 years on the railway. He even had a train named after him. So obviously the Flying Scotsman has been a big part of his life, and quite a big part of my life when having seen pictures of it. It comes, obviously we live in the Surrey Hills, it comes to the Surrey Hills once a year in the summer for usually 2 or 3 times, and that's it. And my children, for example, who are 3 and 6 years of age, they get so excited about, when's the Flying Scotsman coming? We obviously get to go and see it. So in January I was browsing through a couple of websites, and I can't remember the exact point as to why I typed in the Flying Scotsman, but anyway, it came up that it was coming to the Midhants Railway in Hampshire from where we were. It was coming in 6 weeks' time, and I was thinking, well, what's that all about? So I spoke to my dad, who is now a volunteer on the Midhants Railway in carriage restoration, and he said, yeah, it's coming, yeah. I was like, oh, okay, were you ever going to tell me about that? And he goes, well, yeah, I probably was going to, but I've been busy, I've been busy. I was like, yeah, of course you've been busy, Dad. You've retired, you're busier now than you've ever been. And I said, okay, well, I'm thinking about photographing it. Oh, you've got no chance of doing that. Well, they'll have their own pool of photographers, won't they? You're not going to get to do that. And they're railway photographers, and, you're a different kind of photographer. And I was like, right, okay, no problem. Immediately, there's that person saying no.
That lit the fire within you.
Yeah. I was like, okay, well, if Dad tells me I can't do it, then I'm definitely doing it. So, I set about working out how I could best get my foot in the door with them. Very much going back to how it was when I was on my work experience with All Sport, getting my foot in the door, and how I've done it with my Nile Rodgers shoot. Did a bit of research, got through after a couple of weeks chasing the marketing manager for the Midlands Railway. Yeah, made a phone call, and yes, of course, they said, oh, they've got their own pool of photographers. No, sorry. And I did use a little technique I'd remembered from my sales days, with that little bit of almost uncomfortable silence left in the middle of the call, made by me for them to then have to ask a question, which was, unless you think that your stuff is better. To which I replied, yes, I do, not arrogantly, but confidently, because I had obviously researched what their images were like. And for my particular style of storytelling, documentary photography, this would sit perfectly for their like PR event, if you like. To which I received an email a week later to say, wow, amazing, I love the way that you capture the expressions on the young and the older generation, and, we would love to have you as one of our photographers. So that was my first sort of hurdle, and then my next hurdle was to think of how can I get that to a wider audience. So then I contacted a major news agency, and they said, sorry, it's if you want to do any exclusive stuff with the Flying Scotsman, then you have to go to the Science and Society Picture Library, so that's the Science Museum, as everything is owned by them. So then I contacted the National Railway Museum in York, which is where the Flying Scotsman usually lives when it's not out on the road. I couldn't get through to them, so I waited another week patiently, and then finally got through. Spoke to a really, really kind gentleman there, and he said, no, you can't do anything with us. But then, after a bit of a chat, he then put me in touch with the Picture Library, the Science Museum. Spoke to them, they again said no, and then again with a little nice conversation, and they could see that I was obviously not just a press photographer. I was somebody who had, a passion and a love, which is obviously always key. If you really love something enough, then your heart is always going to push you on. And so it ended up that I would then be commissioned to do this shoot for the Flying Scotsman, for the National Railway Museum, and my images will go in the Science Museum. So then my next thing was to think, right, how can I make these shots even more amazing now? Because now I've got the people ready to take on the stuff. I wanted to have an advantage of the light. I didn't know what it was going to do. It was probably going to rain this time of year, but I thought if there's any opportunity and there's not rain, then I need to be there. So I spoke to the mid-ants, cleared it with my dad, who was going to be my +1, which worked out perfectly because it was a father-son bonding day out, which is rare now, being a parent myself. Most of my time is spent with my children, and obviously my dad's retired anyway, so he's got no time for anybody else. I managed to get there for 5:30 in the morning, and it turned out, maybe that was fate. It was a stunning sunrise that morning. I captured some of my favourite pictures I've taken in years of the sun, shimmering against the Flying Scotsman as it was firing away there, and it had just been sat there sort of peacefully through the night. The stars were still out when I arrived, and it was just magical. And those images have now been they've seen my images, they absolutely love them. I probably shot about 5 different photo shoots within that whole day for different things, portraits, events, it covers everything. A little bit of artistic railway photography in their brand. And then, now all of those parties have seen my images, and they've recommended me to the national and international rail magazines, to which I've sent off my work, and I won't hear back until maybe I see something in the press, or I'll chase it up again in, 4 weeks' time or so.
You've obviously got a passion for photographing different types of items, people, etc., etc. How does that help you when it comes back to doing portraits for businesses, for financial planners in that market? What do you take from a day on the Flying Scotsman to bring back to give you a different edge when it comes to business photography?
I think, well, for a start, there's a good story there. They a lot of people like to hear good stories, don't they? Should they want to ask me, have you got any stories about the Flying Scotsman? Or, I think you just go with that. Obviously, I was absolutely buzzing from that day, and I was buzzing for weeks in the build up to it. If you take that confidence with you and that positivity into a place that maybe is shying away from the camera or doesn't want to have the camera on them, you immediately, you're not being too loud, you're going in there and you're just being gentle but quietly confident. It's a nice presence to have in your workspace, and if you take that with you, then people buy off people. Ultimately, they will see that and they will warm to you, and that experience then fits in. If I can take a portrait out in natural light, then I can do a portrait where they're standing, in front of, two decent lights in their office. So, and the same with in their environment. If they're just, if they're working away in their office, or they're having a business meeting or a pretend business meeting, talking about what they had for breakfast. Again, I'm just there capturing that natural reaction that they are having amongst themselves. So I am almost a fly on the wall, ultimately, which is one of my favourite kinds of photography anyway, because then you're not staging anything. There's nothing, they're not doing anything fake. It's all natural. Somebody in the office, without me being there, is still going to make it, maybe is the office joker, or is somebody that maybe breaks the ice in that setting.
Joe, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. I'll make sure I put links to your portfolio and your contact details in the show notes, so anyone listening who needs to update the photography on their website, on their social media, and just have that set of assets really of digital photography that's really well done, it's authentic, it's professional. They can get in touch with you, they can schedule a shoot. I know you love travelling, so you're happy to go anywhere to do it. And
sure.
Yeah, we'll put you in touch.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook, and thank you to Joe for joining us today. Look, seriously, if the photos on your website and social media are more than a year old, no excuses, get them updated now. As Joe covered in this episode, professional photography is far more affordable than you might think, and a shoot with Joe results in a fantastic set of photography assets that you can use to update your website, social media profiles, and also use in the press. You can find the show notes and some useful links on our website. That's bamfordmedia.co.uk. That's also the place to go to find out how to get in touch with us, to get in touch with Joe, and to book a photo shoot with him. But before I wrap things up for this episode, a quick reminder about the Financial Planner Marketing Summit. That's coming up in Guildford on Friday the 19th of June 2020. It's our second year of a live event, and I really would love to see you there. We've got some fantastic speakers lined up, including our keynote speaker James Woolman, who's author of Time and How to Spend It. I promise you that book and the messages he shares on the day will be absolutely game-changing for your financial planning proposition. So don't miss it. You can check out all of the speakers. You can book your tickets at bamfordmedia.co.uk/FPMS. So do go along there, and I look forward to seeing you in Guildford in June. That's all for this episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you did, then please do subscribe for more. Tell a friend or a colleague to check it out, and do consider leaving us a rating and review on your favourite podcast platform. But until next time, I'm Martin Bamford, and this is the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. To leave you with a quote, Leo Burnett once said, "Creativity about life in all aspects, I think, is still the secret of great creative people."